Hello and welcome to England Cricket on 99.94, the home of cricket audio. I'm Daniel Norcross, BBC Test Match Special commentator, podcaster for At Zero Ducks Given, general writer and wibbler. And today, a rather sombre episode. Today I have the chief cricket writer of Press Association, Rory Dollard. We are the home of your England team content and we'll be right here several times every week discussing England. You can find us in your favourite podcast places on YouTube or in our 99.94 app. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation. Today, well, we will be talking about Alex Hales, the bombshell news that he's back in the England T20 squad. We're going to do a deep dive into him. And then also the slightly concerning news that Nat Sciver has pulled out of the T20 series against India, leaving a gap at the top with no Heather Knight and no Nat Sciver. Amy Jones comes in as captain. We'll take a little look at how that might pan out. But first of all, Rory, I say sombre episode. It's a strange feeling, and it's a strange feeling for English cricket, isn't it? As we note the passing of the monarch for 70 years, a woman who's been quite closely associated with cricket. Her husband, Duke of Edinburgh, was very closely involved in the county championship, was a big patron of cricket. And we're not going to dwell a great deal on that. That's for other people to do. But it created unusual scenes yesterday during the Test match, a very eerie kind of feeling at the Oval as a sort of inevitable pall of dismay kind of passed over a full crowd waiting for the final showpiece event of the season. And, well, I mean, we'll wait to see what happens with the Test match, but a strange and curious time for the country.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you play as much cricket as England do, events will coincide with the England cricket team. It does seem like news was pretty apparent, and I suppose in some way the bad weather at the Oval gave everyone a little bit of time at the ground to sort of get things in a row. There wasn't that strange situation of, I don't know if they'd have taken the players off the field if they would have come off at an appropriate break or what, but it obviously didn't have to do that because of the weather. But yeah, it's all sport will have to come together and have its own understanding of what's going to happen next. But cricket goes on, and that's for our job to discuss it.
It certainly is. So let's get on with the Alex Hales situation, because I didn't actually see that coming. I thought once he'd been left out of the Pakistan side and hadn't been named in the T20 squad, despite the injury to Bairstow, it struck me that the next cab off the rank was going to be Will Jacks. He was in that T20 squad for Pakistan. But they've done let's debate it. It might seem like the right thing to do. You've got a World Cup coming up. There's no planning for the future when you're doing a World Cup. You've got to get the most experienced players out there. And Alex Hales is hugely experienced, not just in T20 cricket, but in Australian pitches. He's played the Big Bash for years. So how do you see it? Do you see it as a volte-face, or do you see it as a sort of a practical move brought about by necessity?
Could be both, of course, at the same time. Mea culpa time, we got this entirely wrong when we discussed this last time. I, like you, felt fairly certain that England and Rob Key had shown us their hand, because by naming that Pakistan squad and by giving the call to Will Jacks, it did seem that they'd kind of lifted the curtain and said, here's our pecking order and here's who we think is next in. Equally, I think if they were on the verge of welcoming Alex Hales back and holding out the olive branch, I think bringing him into that Pakistan squad would have been a really interesting way to do it, because it would have been saying to him, come and rejoin the international setup. You know, your time is done and you're back in, but you're not in the World Cup squad. You've got to come, be a good tourist, a good help out, do your bit for the squad. But actually, the World Cup, that isn't it for you at the moment. And I think I always thought that if he was going to have a chance, he'd have to come in and, I don't know, serve his time a little bit or put a bit back into the pot. So I felt that was the window, and when that window was shut on him, I felt the World Cup was a long way away. So circumstances, I mean, England can't have predicted that this was coming, because they gave Jason Roy a long leash, hoping that he would come back into form. Their next move was to bring Johnny Bairstow up the order and invest in him as an opener. So it is they have, whatever way we look at it, they have pushed a button they weren't expecting to push, because Alex Hales is a really, I suppose, on a basic cricket level, he's a pretty safe bet, because he's always played T20 cricket somewhere in the world and largely pretty successfully. So he is safe in that regard, but it also means there's a pretty short window to get him reintegrated. And in cricket dressing rooms, it's not completely straightforward. Certainly, when you look at the issues that are or have been the lack of trust, senior players. We remember that from the Owen Morgan days, and we know for a fact it wouldn't have happened if Owen Morgan was captain. But Josh Butler was his vice captain. Ben Stokes was his senior player. And they were both involved in the decision to ostracise Alex Hales. So, not straightforward, this one, I don't think, by any means. And I suppose they'll be hoping to get through it. But I wonder how Will Jacks feels. He probably hasn't got too much cause to gripe, because he's about to disappear off on his first England trip, and he's not going to kick the doors down. But he must have thought he was a bit closer than it seems that he is.
Yes, I think it will be a curious thing for Will Jacks, but they'll, I imagine, explain it away as saying, "Well, look, you're clearly in our thinking, but your lack of experience coming into a World Cup is the issue." So, we've gone back to Alex Hales because he knows what he's doing. He's played in these kind of tournaments before. Don't worry, bide your time. You're only 23. I guess that'll be how they'll be playing it with Will Jacks. I just want to job backwards a bit, though, onto how Alex Hales found himself ostracised in the first place, because some listeners may be a little bit confused as to the reasoning behind it. What's your take on exactly what the sequence of events was that resulted in Alex Hales, who, don't forget, held the record for the most number of runs by a batter in a single one-day international innings when he got that 170 odd at Trent Bridge. He was tearing it up at the top of the order. He was getting picked up for franchises left, right, and centre, and then out of the side, sort of fatally just before the World Cup in 2019.
Well, yeah, I mean the basic reason when he fell out of the reckoning is fairly well known. It involved a 21-day ban by the ECB under their rules and regs. That became a 3.5-year de facto ban, I guess. So there was no reason for the whatever transgressions that he did that we know about. There was nothing that was going to keep him out of that World Cup per se, and certainly nothing to keep him out of the aftermath. So I think it's fair to say he was left out not for the letter of the law or the letter of the ECB's law. It was more of a personality thing, potentially. And it was a feeling perhaps that he was not a great influence, not a great vibes man in the team room. Owen Morgan, his phrase that he settled upon was lack of trust, loss of trust. And alluded to it earlier there, in a cricket dressing room, because of the time spent together and away, I feel if there is a moment whereby players feel there's a guy who isn't on the same page or isn't pulling in quite the same direction, that's problematic. And certainly Owen Morgan as a leader decided he didn't have any truck with that. So he has spent a bit of time. He knows a lot of the players pretty well. He still plays with various England players at domestic level, be it 100 or franchise competitions elsewhere. So there is obviously some element that has been rebuilt. And I suppose probably the biggest voice in this would have been Josh Butler, because he's a new captain, taking the reins from Morgan. First summer hasn't gone spectacularly well. He's lacking a few star names for beyond his control. And he's obviously decided that as a man building his own legacy and his own, brand on this England team, he can wear Alex Hales being part of his team because of what he brings.
We're going to return to Alex Hales after this short break. 99.94 is more than just this podcast. Jared Kimber has Red Inca and Double Century, one show that talks about the modern global game, the other that is a deep dive into our sports history. And Double Century will now appear weekly. But there's also our expanding network of teams: England, South Africa, India, West Indies, and now the Sri Lankan show. If you want to find them, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM, downloading our app, or Google 99.94 podcasts. So back to Alex Hales. My take is that the England T20 side, a lot of T20 sides actually, have a lot of reliance on the top order. The way T20 cricket is set up, much more so than in 50-over cricket, much more so than in Test match cricket, simply because the power play is short, the impact you can make in those first 6 to 7, 8 overs in a T20 game can actually shape the narrative of the match. And England, I think, if you'd gone back to the beginning of this season, there were a lot of people who thought, well, we might be about to watch England lose 7 Test matches, but at least the one-day side is in rude health. Didn't know that Owen Morgan was going to retire at that point. There was talk of, is it Buttler and Roy to open, or do you want Buttler further down the order as a finisher? They've got so many opening options. They've got Bairstow as well. We find ourselves on the threshold of a World Cup with a captain who's injured. We're assured that he'll be okay for the World Cup, but it's a strange assurance because, if he's not available now, the World Cup begins. England's first warm-up games start on the 9th of October. I'll be out there in Perth for that, and then 2 in Canberra. Then their World Cup campaign proper will kick off around about the 24th or so of October. That's a while for Buttler to get fit, but he isn't currently fit. They've got bowlers who aren't fit. They've now lost Johnny Bairstow. So what that opening partnership looks like, well, is Hales coming straight into the side? Does he come into to the squad and go straight to the top of the order? And I sort of, look, we got the call wrong last time. I might be about to get the call wrong again, but it feels like that's what you bring him in for, isn't it? He's not there to be part of the squad. He's there to go straight into the team.
That would be exactly how I see it. They could, because in a way, if they felt they were happier with Phil Salt going up, and then Will Jacks is a more, I guess he could fill more different roles because he bowls a bit, and he could slot in different ways. It does feel like if you pull that emergency cord with Alex Hales' name on it, you're probably pulling it in order to put him straight in the team. So there's 7 matches in Pakistan, and as you've said, Joss Buttler is not going to be fit for at least the first half or first 4 or 5. We don't think. So there's a really good chance for Alex Hales to come straight in and just quieten the noise, I guess, and make it, I don't know, put a big score on the board early and get people talking about his sixes and not anything else. Phil Salt has done well enough, I think, to be worthy of a shot opening with him in that initial period. But there has to be some temptation, does there not, to put Hales and Malan together, which we haven't mentioned because they have just spent a month batting together for Trent Rockets in the 100 pretty successfully. David Malan absolutely appears to have taken the bait about have you really got an express turbo gear, and he has. So whether England actually feel that they haven't got an obvious number 3 might be the thing that drags on that. But it would be I suppose in sports we often try and replicate at international level sort of a handy club partnership. But if people have been working together, it's nice to bring them up as a pair. And Malan and Hales actually it looks like quite an interesting opening partnership in the absence of Buttler, Roy, and Bairstow.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know why England fans and England pundits have not exactly a downer on Malan, but there's always concerns about the speed with which he starts. When he had that incredible period when he was averaging over 50 in T20 cricket, became the world number 1 T20 batter. And yet there was almost like a kind of sense of resentment that that Milan was doing so well. It was almost as if, well, he's doing well, but our eyes can't deceive us. He's not Joss Butler. He's not Johnny Bairstow. He's not Alex Hales. He's he can play stodgy innings. He could get 11 in 14 balls, and it felt like that could be fatal, especially at the top of the order with
Yeah.
the frenetic way that England like to start their innings. It would be quite the thing for him to end up opening. But you make a strong point. The Trent Rockets, they're champions. They're the 100 champions. They know each other's game inside out. There's a left-hand, right-hand combination. Never quite certain how vital that is. The stats don't always bear out that it makes an enormous difference, to be honest. But is he in Australia the right guy? It sort of feels like he might be. It sort of feels
He'll be
that for
important
Australian
one way or the other.
conditions. Yeah, well, I mean, they're both hugely experienced in Australia. Milan, well, almost in a strange kind of way in Test cricket, seen as a sort of hard, bouncy wicket specialist. Yeah, he started the Ashes series really well. I know it's a totally different form of cricket, but he's familiar with Australia. He went to two Ashes series now, 2017-18 as well as 21-22. Alex Hales has played an enormous amount of Big Bash. It feels like that is a combination that could be almost by accident what England really need to alight on. And then we might end up having the debate, should Joss Butler go down the order and be the finisher in Australian conditions? I don't know.
Bin that idea off. I think I'm reasonably comfortable with the idea of Joss Butler facing as many balls as it's absolutely possible for Joss Butler to face. I'm pretty comfortable.
So Milan
with that.
would go down to, you'd imagine Milan down at 3, would you? Yeah.
I'm wondering about Milan and Hales in Pakistan, is whether they would like to have a look at that, or whether that's just destabilising a bloke from a pretty important role anyway. But yeah, I think just on Milan, I feel that there was a time when he was number one in the world, when there was a time where almost the received wisdom, the consensus was that England will play him, give him enough rope to play his way out of the team. Like almost like that a couple of those hundreds were just kind of happened, and it was a bit of an accident, and the England would keep picking him until such a point that he proved them wrong to do so in a way. That's what people genuinely did say. And here we go again. Another World Cup. He's still there. He's still going. He's had a really good 100. He's quite a fascinating cricketer, David Milan, and he's making a bloody good go of his international opportunities that he's been given, which isn't perhaps as many as he might have earned.
Finally, on Alex Hales, I'm bound to ask this question. If the genie's out of the bottle or back in the team, to mix my metaphors,
Yeah.
does this open the pathway, presumably, to one-day international cricket again? Same captain. And you could argue that actually, with this, the way Jason Roy's form has fallen off a cliff, England actually desperately need a fit and firing Alex Hales at the top of the order in 50-over cricket. There is a World Cup of 50-over cricket not that far away. And you know what I'm going to ask? If he's back in the ODI fold and he's back in the T20 fold and he's playing with the England Test captain Ben Stokes when he's playing those T20s, well, I mean, Bazball seems to scream out for Alex Hales, doesn't it?
Oh my God. Okay, 50 over, maybe, because as you say, it's Butler, it's Matthew Mott, it's the same people who've made that same decision. It's an option. I think it sounds like Rob Key is more than happy to give Jason Roy a bit more time, a bit more rope in the 50 over. And I also think, given the sort of fractious or slightly distant relationship involving Alex Hales over these last few years, I also feel like they'll find him a fairly easy person to cut loose. If this World Cup doesn't go well, I think he might be someone they find quite easy to shuffle out in terms of the next rebuild. Test cricket, I'm pretty sure we can call that a fantasy. I don't see it in any way. I mean, I don't know when the last time Alex Hales saw a red ball. Do you? Does he even know? Like, does he know they still? Do they know they still make them? I don't know. I don't think that's a flyer whatsoever. Be surprised.
It does seem fanciful, but the question has to be asked. That's where we're going to leave Alex Hales. Love cricket and want to hear more? Well, head over to the 99.94 app. You can hear all our podcasts and our commentary. We're the home of cricket audio online, and we're adding new shows and covering series all the time. The best way to follow us is via our app or on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation. Now, lastly, on today's show, the news that Nat Sciver is stepping away from the England team for the T20 series. She's had an awful lot of cricket. This is a function, it seems to me, Rory, of women's cricket really exploding in the last few years, and the England women's team in particular playing a really enormous amount of cricket. We look at the way England's men's team have been put through the ringer with numerous series butting against each other, to the point when England's ODI series against Netherlands was happening in the middle of a test series. We saw with the women when they went down under for the Ashes series, the series itself was brought forward next to no notice. They then had to go to New Zealand straight after for the World Cup. They were in quarantine with each other. They were basically the last teams to quarantine in New Zealand before the restrictions were lifted. They've then played a load of games against South Africa. They played seven matches against South Africa, including a test match. They went straight into the Commonwealth Games and straight out of the Commonwealth Games into the 100. Now, I'm sure they're not complaining. I'm sure they're delighted at the volume of cricket that they're now playing. I imagine they'd quite like to be remunerated a little better and a little bit more equally, and they'd have every right to press that case. But they will not be used to such a workload. And I think, we might start seeing things that are playing out in men's cricket, playing out in women's cricket. Catherine Brunt has been able to be an all-format England player for the best part of 20 years. But in large part, that's because there have been great chunks of time in between those series when she hasn't been playing. So had plenty of rest. Now you're seeing her retiring from Test cricket. You're seeing her being rested more frequently. This is just a function of workload, isn't it, Rory?
I think so. Yeah, it's that period of time, and it has been a really, really busy summer this year. But you're right to drag it back to quarantine and to COVID, because the women, I think, did put in an unusual workload in terms of time in four walls. They were that quarantine period where, don't know, get the feeling that the superstars on the men's team from England or other countries might not have worn that and might have pulled out. I think what they were asked to do was too tough, and they have had a really intense summer. So no surprise potentially that Nat Sciver's done this. The alarm bell, and not to talk beyond what we know and what we understand to be the case, is that she makes this decision immediately after accepting the captaincy and saying that she'll lead this series. It's clearly been either a late decision, a change of mind, or it was something she was considering and didn't know how to express it, because she was named as captain. I spoke to Alice Capsey about 3 or 4 hours before Nat Sciver was announced that she was withdrawing. And actually, the piece I wanted to write, the piece I did write, and it was online for about 3 hours, was Alice Capsey talking about Nat Sciver's captaincy, because she was the only captain. She was the only captain that Alice Capsey had played under for England because of this summer. And it was about what a cool, calm, stabilising influence Nat Sciver was on the group. So if you've got the person, and Alice Capsey said to me that she was someone who you could always get a rational answer out of when things were getting a bit hairy on the pitch, And if a rational person like that, with that cool, calm head on her shoulders, says that this is too much, listen.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we wish her all the very best. We don't know precisely the reasons for it. Burnout, there may be personal reasons as well. But we're seeing it increasingly in women's cricket. We saw Meg Lanning pulling out of the 100. We're seeing, as I've mentioned already, people retiring from different formats to try to elongate their careers. I think on balance, you'd have to say that it's a sign of the growth of English women's cricket, well, of women's cricket around the world, but England's women and Australia's women, and increasingly India's women as well, are starting to play more and more cricket. And that's something that you need to adjust to. And it's a good thing. It will hopefully come, as I mentioned or alluded to, with greater rewards and greater recognition. It's certainly going to come with an improvement in standards. We're seeing women's standard of women's cricket going through the roof. So these are just things I think that the sport's going to have to adapt to and address. Before we go, very briefly though, Amy Jones is taking over, and think about stars of captaincy: a keeper captain. So just as Joss Butler would have been if he were fit,
Yeah.
or is when he is fit, a very calm, very steady player, but not actually one in the greatest of form with the bat at the moment. And people have been sort of gently looking at Amy Jones's form. She's a terrific keeper, um, but the 100 has showcased that there are other good keepers out there, and how important is a really good keeper in T20. The ball doesn't tend to go through, doesn't tend to beat the bat quite as often. So it's an intriguing move. Is it one really that's because that T20 side has been very youthified, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
with Tammy Beaumont out, with Heather Knight, with Tammy Beaumont not selected and Heather Knight out injured, Nat Sciver out, Catherine Brunt out, suddenly you've got a very, very young looking T20 side, which is great for English cricket, because English women's cricket has often been accused of having quite a small pool of
Close
players
shot,
to choose
yeah.
from. Now we're sort of seeing more. But is Amy sort of captain by default? Or, I mean, she has captained before. She has, not for England, but she
In the
captained.
100, yeah.
Do you think it's a good selection for you?
Well, interesting. When we discussed the women's squad a couple of days ago, we found ourselves scrambling around actually for a couple of names, and we didn't name, we didn't hit upon Amy Jones, but we did. I think while we were just throwing a few names around, come to the idea that there wasn't an overwhelmingly obvious person to do it that sort of checked everything. With Amy Jones, I wonder if this is a player who they obviously they back and they are pretty dead set behind her. And I wonder if they think if there is a little drop in form, I wonder if they think actually giving her something else to think about might unlock something with the bat. If you've suddenly got the captaincy on your mind and you've got a few field changes, you've got an order to work out, and you're looking out for a few of those young players that you mentioned. Maybe you find out that Amy Jones has walked to the crease and she's not in her head about it, and she can maybe just play with a little bit more freedom. That would be the best case scenario, I suppose. But yeah, I suppose the other question is who would come in. They will replace Nat Sciver at some point. Tammy Beaumont could get that call, couldn't she? That could be the way back in, and that would be the 100th cap that we talked about. Lauren Winfield Hill had a good 100. Another experienced player. It probably looks like, as you said, it is a young squad with a few sort of fresh bodies around. It might be the case that when they look to replace Nat Sciver in this squad, one of those more well-travelled heads might be the way to go, and they might come straight into the team as well and be another sort of experienced head for Amy Jones to bounce off.
It's so difficult for the selectors because you're replacing two players in one. Sciver's so important in balancing the bowling attack. She's probably the most important batter in that side. Trying to find that. I mean, they might prioritise the batting because they do have other bowling options with Capsey as an all-rounder at the top, with Sophie Eccleston leading the attack. Kate Cross may even come in to do a bit of bowling. She's been in and around that squad as an elder stateswoman, but not playing. Almost feels like sort of holding the hands of the youngsters. Or they may go completely left field, get Rhiannon McDonald-Gay in, who took 6 for in the match against India when the England development squad played the other day. 6 for in 3.5 overs. She had a terrific 100. I think that's unlikely, but they do have to find 2 players in one, which is, of course, extraordinarily difficult. That's where we're going to leave it today. We're not quite sure when we'll be back. A lot's going to depend on events, dear boy, events that take place out there. We don't know when the next series of events are going to be at the time of recording this. All these things will become clear clearer at any rate over the next 24 hours. But for now, thank you for listening to England Cricket on 99.94. Please rate, review and subscribe. You can download the 99.94 app from your phone, and you can follow us personally on Twitter or Instagram on @Norcross Cricket in my case. And Rory, you have to say it.
At the RVD. THE-RVD, not the wrestler. Not yet.
We'll put links up for everything we do there on this podcast and beyond. Also follow our network at 9994DM on social media. Follow for podcasts and commentary from the bat and ball world. Thanks for joining Cricket's Conversation on 99.94.